Russia is a country that has made its economy dependent on oil production and exports. However, this strategy may prove short-sighted, as Russia's oil reserves are limited and increasingly difficult to access. According to data, Russia produces 10.7 million barrels of oil per day, ranking it third in the world behind the US, 17.9 million, and Saudi Arabia, 10.8 million. Russia faces a serious problem. Its oil reserves are running out. According to the Ministry of Natural Resources, no tenders for the exploitation of large hydrocarbon deposits were announced already in 2017. It is becoming increasingly difficult and expensive to find new deposits, and the current ones are being exploited to the limit. What does this mean for Russia's economy and politics? Russia is heavily dependent on oil and gas exports. According to the World Bank, before the war in Ukraine, these commodities accounted for more than 60% of the value of Russian exports and almost 40% of budget revenues. Because Russia is such a large oil producer and exporter in the world, its influence on the energy market is significant. However, Russia's dominance in this area is coming to an end due to declining reserves and a lack of innovation in the field of mining. Russia currently has around 80 billion barrels of oil, ranking it 8th in terms of reserves. However, most of these resources are located in difficult-to-access regions, such as eastern Siberia, the Kara Sea, and the Sea of Okhotsk. Mining these deposits requires advanced technologies that Russia does not have or has limited access to due to Western sanctions. Meanwhile, traditional mining areas such as the Urals and Western Siberia are already heavily depleted and offer no hope of finding new large deposits. Moscow is trying to solve this problem by intensifying extraction from existing deposits, even at the cost of damaging or shortening their lives. It is also not investing enough in the exploration of new fields, believing that the current oil price is too low to make it worthwhile. Instead, it is relying on selling as much oil as possible at the current price in order to maintain its position in the market and provide budget revenues. But such a strategy is short-sighted and dangerous for the future of the Russian economy and energy security. Russia is facing a severe economic crisis that could threaten its political and social stability. The cause of this crisis is the fall in oil prices on world markets, which has hit the country's main source of revenue. According to an analysis by Andrei Movchan, an economist at the Carnegie Center in Moscow, Russia's dependence on oil is dangerous for its future. Movchan says that oil sales account for 26% of all foreign income, and oil and gas exports make up 60% of state revenues. The federal budget is 40% directly dependent on oil, and if all indirect effects, such as importing goods with oil money, are included, the figure rises to 84.3%. This means that any fall in oil prices will create a huge budget deficit, forcing the government to look for other sources of funding. One such source could be the issuance of money, which leads to inflation and a reduction in the purchasing power of the population. Another could be restricting capital flows abroad, which will affect investment and the competitiveness of the economy. Yet another could be price controls and currency transactions, leading to shortages and the development of a black market. All of these measures could be disastrous for Russia's development and prosperity. Movchan warns that Russia has little time to avoid such a scenario. According to him, Russia will retain a degree of resilience for another 6 years, after which there will be a need for urgent and decisive changes to preserve the integrity and governability of the state. Examples of such changes include diversifying the economy, reforming the tax system, improving the business climate, and international cooperation. In this context, Movchan calls on the Russian authorities to take bold steps to modernize and transform the country. Only in this way can Russia avoid the fate of Venezuela, which has lost almost 2/3 of its potential oil production capacity in 10 years. Only in this way can Moscow ensure its independence and security in a changing world. The country is expected to produce around 9 million barrels a day in 2024, a significant drop from the current 10.7 million. But that is not the end of the problems. Projections for 2033 suggest that Russia's oil production could fall to just 5 million barrels a day. This is a huge drop, given that Russia consumes 3.5 million barrels of oil per day domestically. In other words, its exports will fall from 7.2 million barrels a day today to around 1.5 million barrels a day in 2033. In addition, oil production in Russia will become more expensive and less profitable. Russia has large oil reserves, but most of them are in hard-to-reach regions, such as the Arctic. In addition, Russia's tax system burdens oil producers with high levies that account for a significant proportion of the price per barrel. Russia produces a similar amount of oil globally to Saudi Arabia. However, its production costs are much higher than in the Gulf, where oil is readily available and cheap. According to the Statista portal, the cost of extracting Russian oil in Russia is more than $40 per barrel, while it is less than $20 in Saudi Arabia or Kuwait. Even in other Gulf countries, such as Iraq, the United Arab Emirates and Iran, the cost of production is less than $30 per barrel. Russian Deputy Energy Minister Pavel Sorokin admitted in an interview with the Vedomosti portal that the cost of extracting Russian oil is about $25, with the rest being taxes. He also said that Russia needs to prepare for the development of more expensive reserves, which means that the cost of extraction will rise and the tax system should adapt accordingly. Sorokin warned that if oil prices fall below $60–70 a barrel, Russian production could be at risk. Russia is dependent on oil exports, which account for about 40% of its budget revenues. The authorities in Moscow are therefore trying to maintain high levels of oil production and sales on world markets. However, Russia has to compete with other producers who have lower production costs and can offer cheaper oil. Russia also faces the risk of sanctions from the West, which could limit its access to technology and markets. Moscow therefore faces a difficult choice: either cut oil taxes and reduce budget revenues, or invest in developing new reserves and increase extraction costs. In either case, Russia faces a loss of competitiveness and oil export revenues. Russia is facing serious problems in the energy sector that could threaten its position as one of the world's largest producers and exporters of oil and gas. It is not just a question of falling commodity prices on world markets, but also a lack of new fields, difficulties in accessing technology, and rising extraction costs. The oil industry relies mainly on old and depleted fields, which require increasing investment and technology. According to the Ministry of the Environment, more than two-thirds of oil production comes from existing fields, often in hard-to-reach regions of Western Siberia and the Urals. Russia has not made any significant new oil discoveries for years, and work on the Arctic shelf has been disrupted by sanctions and a lack of equipment. Russia faces the cost of extracting hard-to-reach oil, which averages $70 per barrel onshore, and as much as $150 in the Arctic. In addition, access to the necessary technology is restricted by sanctions imposed by the West following the annexation of Crimea in 2014. These sanctions have denied the Russian oil and gas industry access to cutting-edge technologies such as horizontal drilling and shale techniques. To extract from these fields, it is necessary to use foreign subcontractors and technology from companies such as Schlumberger and Halliburton. It is not just a question of the amount of oil or gas to be extracted, but also the challenges of technology and access to modern solutions. Russia has not brought new gas fields into production or discovered significant new oil fields. Under these conditions, Russia will not be able to develop the fields in eastern Siberia and the Arctic shelf that are considered crucial to the country's energy future. Moscow must take urgent steps to modernize its energy sector and find new sources of revenue. Otherwise, it could lose its competitiveness and influence on the international stage. The Federation is facing an economic catastrophe due to the fall in the price of oil, its main source of revenue. Without oil, the federal budget will not be able to cover state expenditure, and the government will be forced to take drastic measures such as printing money, restricting economic freedom, and controlling prices. This will lead to inflation, poverty, and social instability. Russia urgently needs to diversify its economy and find new sources of revenue if it is to avoid the fate of Venezuela, which has been plunged into a deep crisis by its dependence on oil. Russia still has a few years to reform and adapt to the new energy situation, but time is running out and decisive action is needed. Thank you for watching the video. Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. See you next video.